My name is Lucas, and I'm 26. I've had a life full of contradictions, a mix of calculated ambition and reckless curiosity. From an early age, I had a knack for unraveling puzzles, whether they were intricate math problems or the motivations of the people around me. But this analytical nature came with a darker side, an almost obsessive need to uncover hidden truths, no matter the cost. My fixation often led me down paths I'd later regret, straining relationships and putting me at odds with those I cared about. Perhaps it's this trait that made me both fascinated by and skeptical of the supernatural, seeing it as the ultimate unsolved puzzle. I've always had a mild fascination with the supernatural. While part of me entertained the possibility of ghosts, I'd always prided myself on my rational mind. Skepticism was my shield against fear, or so I thought. But what happened on Christmas Eve changed everything. To set the stage, I recently moved in with my older sister, Emily. We've always been close, though our bond was shaped as much by conflict as by shared love. Growing up, Emily was the pragmatic one, calm, methodical, and grounded, while I was the dreamer, constantly chasing fleeting ideas and stirring up trouble. Despite our differences, she'd always been my anchor, the one person I could turn to no matter how far I strayed. After our mom passed away, that bond grew stronger, but it also became more strained. Emily's grief manifested in a quiet, almost stoic resolve, while I buried myself in distractions, trying to escape the weight of it all. Moving in with her felt like both a lifeline and a last resort, a chance to heal wounds that time alone couldn't mend. Life had been rough, a failed business venture, a trail of broken relationships, and then there was our mom. She passed away last year, leaving behind a house full of memories and a gaping void in both our lives. I mention this only because, as strange as it sounds, I sometimes feel her presence lingering. Perhaps it's just grief playing tricks on my mind, or maybe it's something more. Emily and I had been drinking that night. Christmas Eve, after all. We sat in the dimly lit living room, reminiscing about childhood holidays, the scent of pine from the tree mingling with the sharp bite of whiskey. By the time midnight rolled around, I was buzzed enough to feel detached from reality, and the conversation grew quieter until we each drifted to our respective rooms. Around 1 a.m., I woke up parched. The alcohol had left me dehydrated. The house was deathly silent, and a strange chill hung in the air. I dragged myself to the kitchen, fumbling for a glass of water. On my way back to my room, something caught my eye in the living room. A shadow. Instinctively, I stopped and turned. The air seemed heavier, like stepping into a vacuum. There, on the couch, I could swear I saw the outline of a person sitting perfectly still in the dark. My first thought, as rational as it could be in my half-drunken state, was that Emily had left a pile of clothes or a blanket there, and the shadows were playing tricks on me. But the longer I stared, the more convinced I became that it wasn't just an illusion. The figure, if you could call it that, seemed aware. I can't explain how I knew this. It was a sense, a pressure in the room, like the air itself was watching me. My heart pounded, but I refused to let fear get the better of me. With a muttered, "Don't be stupid," I forced myself to turn and walk back to my room, determined to sleep it off. But sleep didn't come. The image of that shadowy figure burned in my mind, and my room felt oppressively quiet. The faint creaks of the house settling now seemed sinister, like footsteps creeping closer. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, until exhaustion finally pulled me under. The next morning, Emily and I sat at the kitchen table, nursing cups of coffee. Her face was pale, her usual cheer absent. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. "Lucas," she said hesitantly, "have you ever felt like there's someone else here?" Her words sent a jolt through me. I set my mug down carefully, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do you mean?" "I mean at night," she continued, her eyes darting toward the living room. "Sometimes, when it's really quiet, I feel like I'm not alone. Like, there's someone sitting there in the corner." My stomach tightened. "Funny you say that," I replied. "Last night, When I went to the kitchen for water, I could have sworn I saw someone on the couch. Emily's face drained of color. I got up for water too. Around 3. And I thought I saw the same thing. Her voice cracked. Lucas, what is that? I wanted to tell her it was nothing. A trick of the light. Alcohol-induced paranoia. But I couldn't. The fear in her eyes mirrored my own. Over the next week, things escalated. At first, it was subtle, barely noticeable things that could be dismissed as quirks of an old house. The lights would flicker now and then, or I'd hear faint creaks in the floorboards at odd hours. Emily started complaining about misplaced items, like her keys showing up in strange places she swore she hadn't been. But soon, the air in the house felt heavier, as though it were alive with something unseen. The shadows seemed darker, stretching unnaturally across the walls, and the faint hum of whispers became a nightly occurrence. By the end of the week, those whispers were no longer faint, and their tone grew sharper, almost accusatory, as if the house itself were judging us. It was no longer something we could ignore. It started small, flickering lights, doors creaking open on their own. Then came the whispers. Faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably real. At first, I thought they were in my head, but Emily heard them too. A low, murmuring voice, speaking words we couldn't understand. One night, I decided I'd had enough. I've always been the type to confront things head-on, and if there was something in our house, I wanted to know what it was. Armed with a flashlight, I stayed awake long after Emily went to bed, sitting in the living room with the lights off. The darkness was suffocating, the silence deafening. Hours passed, and I began to think I'd imagined it all. And then I saw it. The figure was back, seated exactly where I'd seen it before. But this time, it didn't stay still. It turned its head, slowly, deliberately, and I swear it looked right at me. The air grew colder, my breath visible in the beam of the flashlight. I couldn't move. My body was frozen, pinned by an invisible force. And then it spoke. You don't belong here. The voice was guttural, echoing, like it came from the depths of a cavern. My heart thundered in my chest, and I finally found the strength to move, bolting upstairs to Emily's room. She was already awake, sitting on her bed with tears streaming down her face. You heard it too, she whispered. In the days that followed, Emily and I avoided the living room. We didn't talk about what had happened, but the house felt different now, darker. The air was heavy, oppressive, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer, linger further. I started researching the property, desperate for answers. What I found made my blood run cold. The house had a history, a long, gruesome one. It was built in the late 1800s by Charles Grayson, a man whose reputation was as shadowy as the house itself. Known for his eccentric and often reclusive behavior, Grayson was said to host secret gatherings deep into the night, where strange chants and flickering lights would emanate from the house. Neighbors whispered of occult practices, of rituals meant to summon forces beyond human comprehension. Then, one night, Grayson and his entire family disappeared without a trace. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just an empty house, silent and cold. Over the decades, subsequent owners reported eerie occurrences, objects moving on their own, chilling voices in the dark, and, in one case, a man driven to madness after claiming to see something lurking in the shadows. It remained abandoned for years until our parents, unaware of its sinister past, bought it to start anew. Little did they know, the darkness that once consumed its halls had never truly left. Decades ago, it had belonged to a man named Charles Grayson, a reclusive figure rumored to dabble in dark rituals. Neighbors spoke of strange lights and sounds coming from the house at all hours. One night, Charles and his entire family vanished without a trace. The house sat abandoned for years before our parents bought it. I didn't tell Emily what I'd discovered. She was already on edge, and I didn't want to make things worse. But the more I learned, the more I realized we were dealing with something far beyond our understanding. Something malevolent. Now, as I write this, I can feel it watching me. The weight of its presence presses down on my chest, making each breath a struggle. The shadows in the room seem alive, twisting and shifting at the edges of my vision. My hands tremble as I type, the chill in the air seeping into my bones. The whispers are louder now, no longer faint but insistent, their cadence a dark melody that gnaws at the edges of my sanity. Fear grips me, but beneath it lies a spark of defiance. If this thing seeks to break me, it will have to do more than watch. I refuse to look away, even as every fiber of my being screams to run. The air in the room is cold, and the whispers are growing louder. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm done running. If this thing wants to confront me, so be it. Let it come.